Welcome and thank you for joining us, and I apologize for the delay. This event was organized in conjunction with the exhibition currently on view, Proving Ground by David Maisel, which shares a unique and largely unknown part of Utah history, and it aligns with the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum of Art's mission to expand and diversify our understanding of the American West, specifically through modern and contemporary art over the last 100 years. As an academic art museum, we strive to be experimental and encourage innovative forms of pedagogy across disciplines, with the intention to garner learning that makes a lasting impression. We provide various modes of inquiry that are frequently interdisciplinary to expand our perspectives while spurring critical dialogue and thinking. And one of the ways that we do this is through collaboration. So I want to thank our partners and sponsors, the O.C. Tanner Foundation, USU College of Science, the Quinney College of Natural Resources, the King College of the Arts, the University Inn, Utah Public Radio, and the Utah Division of Arts and Museums for helping us to make this event possible. I also want to thank our members for the museum, and if you are not a member, please check out our member benefits and consider joining. I also want to thank President Noel Cockett and Provost Frank Gailey, my boss, for being such wonderful supporters of the museum and all that we do. Dugway Proving Ground spans approximately 800,000 acres, roughly the size of Rhode Island, and is located about 70 miles southwest of Salt Lake City. It took a decade, roughly, for David Maisel to gain permission through the Pentagon to photograph parts of Dugway. There is much that we will never know about U.S. Army Dugway Proving Ground simply due to its mission to test chemical and biological defense systems and perform nuclear, biological, and chemical survivability testing. However, Maisel's aerial photographs and videos encourage us to ponder what it is that we are seeing and to question why such entities exist in these landscapes. David will give a short presentation about the 3 projects that he has done throughout his career in Utah, and then he will be joined on the stage by our other panelists for a discussion about the aesthetics, environment, and politics of Dugway Proving Ground. Following the discussion, there will be a reception with some fun Halloween-themed foods in the museum, and you can purchase a book and have it signed by David Maisel. We co-published this book with Radius Books. We have advanced copies specifically for this event, so take advantage of this opportunity. And we also have copies of Terry Tempest Williams' newest book, Erosions, Essays of Undoing, and she will be signing books as well. I would now like to introduce David. David Maisel explores the aesthetics and politics of radically human-altered environments, framing issues of contemporary landscape with equal measures of documentation and metaphor. Black Maps, his multi-chaptered series of aerial photographs, considers how contemporary space becomes politicized and transformed through processes of industrialization, geoengineering, and militarization. In 2018, Maisel was awarded a Guggenheim Fellow, one of the most prestigious acknowledgments for artists in the United States. Maisel is a 2015 honoree at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts and a 2007 Scholar in Residence at the Getty Research Institute. He is a recipient of an individual artist grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, amongst many others. He received his bachelor's degree from Princeton University and his MFA degree from the California College of the Arts. His work is subject to 5 monographs, and his photographs are included in many public museum collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the National Gallery, the Getty Museum. I could go on, but I won't. Many public collections. Please help me welcome David Maisel.
Thank you for coming out to look and to listen. Before we jump into talking about Proving Ground, I'm going to give you a bit of context for this project. Let's begin with a quote from Don DeLillo's novel, Underworld. A photograph is a universe of dots. The grain, the halide, the little silver things clumped in the emulsion Once you get inside a dot, you gain access to hidden information. You slide inside the smallest event. This is what technology does. It peels back the shadows. So, as Katie was describing, for more than 3 decades, I've been making photographs that consider how the natural world is transformed or subsumed through processes of industrialization, geoengineering, and militarization. And then I've been pursuing these interlinked themes of development and destruction of the environment, particularly that of the American West. So here we're seeing a tailings pond on the periphery of an open pit mine in Butte, Montana. As Katie described, the project as a whole is called Black Maps. That title comes from a poem by Mark Strand. And it's this multi-chaptered series showing the American West and other territories as the site of human-induced trauma. Zones of open pit mining and water reclamation sites, for example. This is Owens Lake in California, my home state, which was drained and diverted to bring water to Los Angeles, becoming an epic environmental disaster in the process. So I often work from an aerial vantage point, and the resulting images encompass documentary and aesthetic perspectives in equal measure. Let me give you 2 quotes that kind of describe my approach to my work. The first is by the film director Wim Wenders in an essay titled The Act of Seeing. He states, "The most political decision you make is where you direct people's eyes." In other words, what you show people day in and day out is political. The second quote is by the American poet Wallace Stevens, who spoke of the real constantly being engulfed in or subsumed by the unreal. In his book, The Necessary Angel, Essays on Reality and the Imagination, Stevens wrote, "We live in the center of a physical poetry, a geography that would be intolerable except for the non-geography that exists there." He goes on to say, "Few people realize that they're looking at the world of their own thoughts and their own feelings." This image is from a tailings pond from a mine in Nevada. So their own thoughts and their own feelings. Is it possible that these environmentally impacted sites actually correspond to something within our own collective psyche? We collectively, as a society, have created these sites over time, perhaps just like the Nazca created their lines and markings in the Peruvian desert, for example. These places reflect us deeply. And further, these are the pending archaeological sites with which future societies may attempt to comprehend us, the creators of the Anthropocene era. So photography for me is a way of investigating the previously invisible or unknown. The environments in which I like to work are generally kind of secret or hidden. They're not places that we know or understand or generally occupy. This image and the prior one, for example, depict wastewater ditches on the western edge of the Great Salt Lake, which are contaminated with dioxin at levels as high as 170 parts per billion. EPA action levels for cleanup supposedly are to begin at 1 part per billion. We could unpack this site for the next several hours, but the photographer Walker Evans spoke about the enchantment of the aesthetically rejected subject, and that seems to be a force at work for me with these kinds of landscapes. It's a conundrum. The baser or more complex the site, the more susceptible it seems to be to aesthetic contemplation, or the more meaningful it becomes as subject matter. Let's take a look at this collage made by the artist Robert Smithson in 1973. I've long been interested in Smithson's theories on landscape, industry, and entropy, and I found his proposal for building viewing platforms in the base of mines, open pit mines, particularly compelling. They basically were intended to transform the mine into a contemporary contemplative garden. This you may recognize as the Bingham Canyon mine outside of Salt Lake City with his collage for such a platform. So you're intended to stand here and look at both geologic and human time. Smithson's proposals led me, years later, to begin my series of aerial images of open pit mines throughout the United States, beginning in 1985 with funding from an individual artist grant from the NEA. So this is an overview of the Bingham mine, one of my early black and white images. And with mining, I found a subject matter that carried forth my fascination with the undoing of the landscape in terms of both its formal qualities and its environmental politics. The photograph as a phantasm, showing the dark side of progress, in a way, a moral void or blankness where decisions unfold and unravel over decades with a kind of mounting cataclysmic force. At the time I made this picture at the Bingham Canyon Mine in 1985, I felt like I was following in the footsteps of the 19th century exploratory photographers like William Henry Jackson, Timothy O'Sullivan, but also like Frederick Sommer with his surreal horizonless desert landscapes of the 1940s, and then also some of the new topographic image makers from the 1970s, including Louis Baltz and Robert Adams in particular. So there's a long history of image making in the American West that has fed me deeply. But I want to expand on those traditions, and I wanted to show sites that had never really been considered as landscapes before. These are what I've come to call synthetic landscapes, such as this surreal image resembling a tumor or an embryo. It's in fact an abandoned tailings pond in Pima, Arizona, that's chock full of cyanide. Cyanide is used in the recovery of microscopic particles of gold from the waste tailings of copper mines. So we're going to move along at a pretty rapid clip. We're going to fast forward to the genesis of the Proving Ground project. In 2003, I began a series called Terminal Mirage. It was a long-term project looking at the site of the Great Salt Lake and its periphery. Terminal Mirage was inspired by the fact that Smithson's seminal artwork, sculpture, the Spiral Jetty, seen here, was reappearing after having been submerged below the waters of the Great Salt Lake for more than a decade. The Great Salt Lake, as you probably know, is indeed a terminal lake. It has no natural outlets, and this physical property results in the lake's exceptional richness in sodium, magnesium, potassium, chloride, sulfate, and other elements common to traditional photographic chemistry, by the way. There's no accident. This is one of the areas that interests me. It's embedded in the possibility of photography itself. There are some 40,000 acres of commercially operated evaporation ponds ringing the lake's perimeter in order to extract these minerals from the lake for industrial use. These grids of evaporation ponds go on seemingly endlessly and become a kind of labyrinth laid over the surface of the lake and its shoreline. The abstraction conjures mid-century modernism, color field painting, Rothko, Diebenkorn, Frankenthaler, and the like. That parallel is intentional, as I'm interested in seeing in the landscape what has become of the goals and dreams and impulses of the modernist quest of the latter part of the 20th century. And here, maybe the most critical image from this series, and what will lead us to Proving Ground. What looks at first like a Donald Judd or Michael Heiser installation or perhaps a new suburban housing development is in fact the Tooele Army Depot about 25 miles southwest of Salt Lake City. It's an ammunition storage facility that, at the time I made this photograph in 2003, was home to 42% of the nation's expired chemical weapons. At the time I made this image, there were nearly 30 million pounds of aging mustard and nerve agents such as sarin and tabun stored in hundreds of igloos at the facility, I believe about 900 of these little buildings, awaiting disposal by incineration, which then sent contaminated ash over the waters of the lake and nearby towns. So nearby this igloo field was the Tooele Chemical Agent Disposal Facility incinerator, which was completed at a cost of several $100 million. So the plant started burning the chemical weapons at the depot in August 1996. So learning about the transformation of this landscape into a repository for toxic weaponry, of course, set off alarm bells and triggered many questions from me. And those questions like, where do these chemical weapons come from? And how does a space like this become devoted to such military activity? Led me directly to Dugway Proving Ground, this vast military complex located about 45 miles to the southwest of Tooele. So here we're going to start looking at Proving Ground, and at some of the images in the show at the museum. As Katie was saying, since its inception in 1942, Dugway has been devoted in part to the development and testing of chemical and biological weapons and defense programs. Its isolated setting in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert, along with its scale of some 800,000 acres, larger indeed in the state of Rhode Island, make it particularly suited to working with virulent substances like anthrax, sarin, plague, the botulism toxin, and other chemical and biological agents. In spite of its massive size, though, Dugway seems to remain nearly invisible. Not only is it located by necessity in an extremely remote area, but it seems to be rarely discussed in the media, and it's almost, generally entirely closed to civilian visitors. On aeronautical charts, the militarized airspace of Dugway is labeled restricted R6402A, and pilots are cautioned of special military activity. So despite these obstacles to access, or maybe because of them, I became captivated with the idea of making photographs there. In 2004, my initial request to the Pentagon for permission to photograph at Dugway was denied. In 2013, though, I was introduced to James Petro, the Pentagon's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Chemical and Biological Defense. And in 2014, with his support, I received permission from the Pentagon and Colonel Ronald Pfizer, then the commander of Dugway, to make photographs there, provided I was, quote, comfortable with the few requirements to ensure everyone's safety, security, and continued success of their ongoing activities, end quote. So every site I've been permitted to photograph at Dugway has been vetted multiply by layers of military personnel, and I'm accompanied at all times by at least one, if not two or three representatives of Dugway. But I want to say I have also been granted an extraordinary degree of access to work in zones that are otherwise restricted from civilian view. This enigmatic structure is the Air Force Targeting Grid Building, and it's designed to be seen from above by Air Force, for it and its shadow, actually, to be seen from above by Air Force pilots as they make their way over Dugway in fighter jets at extremely high speed en route to the Utah Test and Training Range. So basically, the building and its shadow serve as a marker set into the desert landscape. So as the project developed, it became an investigation not only into what happens at Dugway, but into some of the basic structural elements of photography as a medium: abstraction, seriality and sequence, gridding, framing, and the building up of related components. So these are sort of interlinked formal devices of modernism that are also central to the process of transforming both terrain and built structure into measuring devices for weaponry systems and testing at Dugway. Case in point. Now we're going to look at some of the open-air sites of weapons testing grids from an aerial perspective. In the center of this image is that same Air Force target structure we saw previously. I made the decision to grid each aerial image into a 9-part 3x3 grid. So the overlay of this rectilinear grid suggests the cartographic urge for order, clarity, and objectivity, conditions that can be approached but never, I would argue, fully achieved. Looking down from above reveals colossal weapons testing sites that are carved onto the land, these kind of nested circles and crosshatch grids. They, to me, seemed like the abstract drawings of Agnes Martin or Sol LeWitt. But the gridded landscape becomes a measuring device against which dispersal rates, toxicity levels, and threats to the human body are measured. If you've had a chance to see the exhibition, you've seen these gridded images as they're depicted here. Printing them directly onto aluminum. Each element of the grid is 40 by 40 inches, so the overall dimensions of these works are about 10 by 10 feet. I wanted these pieces to be immersive. So photography is essentially a medium of extraction. It slices into reality and gives us a kind of dermatological biopsy to examine. It, in a way, is a medium of autopsy. To autopsy means literally to see for oneself. And yet, I often don't understand what it is I'm seeing as I'm making these pictures. So I have to have a certain amount of curiosity. And that curiosity about the unknown really drives my process of working. This is the South Ballistics Grid, a biological test grid and dispersal zone. I'm going to move more quickly here. So interest in biological and chemical weapons testing began at Dugway in during World War II, but that interest, I think, was rekindled during the 80s with the use of chemical weapons in Iran and Iraq, and also an incident in the Ukraine in which the most toxic form of anthrax was accidentally released from a military facility in the city of Sverdlovsk on April 2nd, 1979. The accident is sometimes called the biological Chernobyl. So for context, anthrax and sarin gas and other toxins have been weaponized by governments and terrorists alike. In 1995, a sarin attack by domestic terrorists on the Tokyo subway killed 12 people and caused temporary vision problems for nearly 1,000 victims. Anthrax attacks by mail, as we know, proliferated in the United States in the months after 9/11, killing 5 people and infecting at least 17. More recently, the UN has found that sarin was used by pro-government forces in devastating attacks on Syrian civilians near Damascus and Aleppo that claimed between 350 and 1,400 lives in 2013 and 2014. So Dugway is devoted in part to developing defense systems against such attacks, whether on the battlefield or in domestic settings. I also became interested in the architecture and design of this lab at Dugway. It's sort of this expression of hyper-modernity, a kind of faith in the power of technology. The facility is called WSLAT, which stands for the Whole System Live Agent Test Chamber, and it was inaugurated just a few days after my making these pictures. It's designed to warn of the presence of airborne deadly biological agents, including anthrax and plague. This is part of that same lab, essentially the inner sanctum, the test chamber where aerosols containing biohazards are introduced for detection and identification. Dugway is licensed to store and test live agents up to biosafety level 3, so that means there is a known vaccine or cure for these specific kinds of toxins. And because live agents are used in this lab, WSLAT is, of course, designed for safety. There are multiple negative pressure barriers, ultra-high performance filters, and the intention is that not even a molecule of biological agent could escape. That's the idea. But, there are issues that come up. In June of 2015, it was revealed that beginning in 2007, live anthrax samples were sent from Dugway without proper safeguards to commercial companies, academic institutions, and federal facilities. So radiation that was used to kill the anthrax didn't, in fact, destroy all the live spores, and the equipment that was designed to test for live spores following irradiation failed. Some of those labs that the anthrax was sent to didn't even have the proper equipment to handle live anthrax. So an investigation by the Pentagon revealed that the anthrax had been shipped to 194 laboratories in all 50 states and 9 foreign countries. At a public hearing that summer, the Deputy Defense Secretary, Robert Work, described the years-long incidents as, quote, a massive institutional failure. So now I'm going to quickly show a final sequence of aerial images that are also in the exhibition and in a video in the exhibition as well. These are actually sourced from drone footage that was made for the military, and they show tests. So they were not made by me, but they show tests done with the Department of Homeland Security. Basically, they sponsored a series of atmospheric releases of what they call toxic inhalation hazard materials, specifically chlorine and ammonia. So here you're seeing the moment of a chlorine gas detonation. These tests, collectively called the Jackrabbit Project, began in 2010. And were conducted in order to determine the nation's vulnerability to TIHs, that is, toxic inhalation hazard materials, that could be weaponized, and what would happen if they were weaponized near urban areas. So the test was conducted in a remote part of Dugway. In 2015, the test continued, and that's what we're seeing here. And they were, at that point, using only chlorine. These were dubbed Jackrabbit 2. So there were multiple releases of 10 tons of chlorine that were detonated onto what they considered this urban test grid, simulating a worst-case scenario. So nearly 100 tons of chlorine were released into the atmosphere during Jackrabbit 2. So not taken into account, I don't think, in the design of these tests is the capacity for these detonated toxins to drift into the airspace of civilian communities, exposing those whom these tests are intended to protect. So the simulated catastrophe is thus both a harbinger of future possibility and an introduction to it. So at the crux of this Proving Ground project, for me, lies the question of what we demand from the land of the American West. What needs does it fulfill, and to what has it been sacrificed? And I think at this point I will close because I'm very eager to move into the panel discussion. So thank you for that.
If our other panelists would like to come and make yourselves comfortable. For a little bit more than a year now, our weekly science radio program has been bringing researchers together from very different fields to talk to one another about their work. We've put paleontologists together with atmospheric scientists. We've paired up geologists with neuroscientists. We just like making interesting matches. And our goal is always to bring people together with very different sets of experiences and expertise. And I do think we do a pretty good job at that, but we have never had a group quite like the one that Katie has put together today. Joining us today, as you know, is the amazing photographer David Maisel, whose work focuses on the aesthetics of human-altered environments. David has wanted to find art at Dugway Proving Ground for a long time. As we heard, he was finally granted access to do so in 2014. And the result, if you have not had an opportunity to walk through, I mean, you saw it here, it's absolutely breathtaking. It is even more breathtaking in the gallery, so please avail yourself of that, and please help me welcome again David Maisel. So we have a photographer. We also have an author, Terry Tempest Williams, whose books, poetry, and essays are rooted in social and environmental justice. Her books include Refuge, An Unnatural History of Family and Place, Red, Patience and Passion in the Desert, and perhaps very applicable to today's discussion, Finding Beauty in a Broken World. Terry, thanks for being here. Okay, so now we've got a photographer and we've got an author. We also have an ecologist, Mark Brunson, whose research is centered on the dynamics of human natural systems, in particular those systems in relationship to invasive species, a fact that I think may become pertinent to today's discussion as well. Mark noted recently on Twitter that when science and avarice mix, the consequences can be dangerous. Welcome, Mark Brunson. And now we're going to put our photographer and our author and our scientist together with a senior civilian military official, Vincent Liddiard, who is the chief of staff of the nation's largest test center for chemical and biological defense, the center that is at the heart of David's recent exhibit. Vincent's perspective on the way that humans alter their environments isn't limited to what has happened at Dugway. He moved to Eagle Mountain, Utah, when there were just a few thousand people there. Today there are 32,000 people and counting, and as you can tell, Vincent's not that old. But he's gotten a lot done. He served on the city council. He was mayor for a while, 30 days, is that correct?
30 days was enough.
And like everyone else here, he is interdisciplinary. He is also a voiceover artist, and as he talks, you'll know why. You guys, this is a motley crew, but already, as you might have noticed, there is a significant amount of overlap in what these folks do, what they study, what they create, and what they think about. And today we're going to explore those intersections through the lens of Dugway. I'm going to start with an individual question for each of you, and then once we're done with that, I'm going to ask some questions of the group, and I'm going to let you guys have at each other. But let me start with Vincent. You've been with the Army or working with the Army or working for the Army at Dugway since 1997. That was the year, by the way, that you got your master's degree at Utah State University, so welcome home.
Yeah, thank you very much, Utah State University.
I would like you tonight to start by divulging a secret about one of the most secretive places in the world. And here's what I'd like you to tell us. What's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen at Dugway?
My wife on my way coming home.
That is a good answer. What is the second most beautiful thing you've ever seen at Dugway?
You know, that's a really good question. So I got to give a little caveats here. During that entire time, part of that time, I was actually a contractor. So I worked for another company that had a contract with the United States Army. And yes, I am the United States Army Chief of Staff for Dugway Proving Ground. But my comments tonight are mostly going to be, what you're going to hear are my own personal comments and opinions, not necessarily the policy of Dugway Proving Ground or the United States Army.
So the Army's official policy is not that your wife is the most beautiful thing at Dugway?
As much as I'd like to make that so, that is my own personal opinions. Dugway Proving Ground, the second most beautiful thing I've seen there, that's a tough question. I think it has to be, that is a really tough question. You know, I think one of the things that is I'm constantly amazed at the beauty that I get to enjoy. I'm constantly amazed at being able to see the dedication of good people. They don't only work there, they live nearby, or they live in Salt Lake or Tooele, and there seems to be a deep passion where they can't seem to figure out that they'd get paid more if they worked somewhere else. But nevertheless, they are deeply committed to what they do, and they firmly believe that they're making a positive difference in the world. Many of them are there trying to do their part to save lives. Some of them are there because they have family members or they're previous members of the military. But they each bring something unique. And for me, the beauty is in the environment, and the beauty is seeing the contributions of a group of people united for one common good.
David, you got to see this firsthand, and we were chatting a little bit before about how impressed you were with the people that you met, and how even though you came from very different places and might have suspected that you had very different perspectives on the world, you came to find a kinship with a lot of these people. You chose this place, Dugway, to explore the ways in which the natural world meets the human moderated world. I'm wondering, what do we stand to discover in these sorts of liminal spaces?
Yeah. So like a liminal space is a space that's kind of a threshold environment. And I think the spiral jetty is a great example of that, actually. I mean, it's already 50 years old, but I think it's still incredibly relevant. And if I use that as an example, it is like being in a labyrinth. You know, if you're walking out on the spiral, you're passing where you've been, you're passing where you're going to be, and that gives us an opportunity to look back in time and to understand our perspective historically, but also to look forward in time. So that, I think, that kind of liminal space, maybe Dugway again could be considered a liminal space, or the approach I've taken to it. So if we learn how to understand our place in time, humanity's place in time, I think we stand to gain a lot from it. There's a really remarkable book by this geologist, Marcia Bjornerud, and she talks about what we could learn from a greater understanding of geologic time and how that might help us kind of save ourselves and save the world. So maybe that's what a liminal space could potentially do, is kind of permit us to understand our place in time.
A little bit of perspective.
Yeah.
Terry, I want to pose a similar question to you, because your work often centers on the interface of where human society meets the natural world, particularly here in Utah. this state that you have called a beautiful violence. And I understand that you brought something to read. Can you read that for us now?
Yeah, and I just want to say what a privilege it is to be here. With David, the courage and power of your work. For those of us who are Utahns, you allow us to see our place differently. Mark, to be able to interpret from a biological standpoint what's at stake. And Vincent, I have just loved our time together. You know, we wouldn't get an opportunity to speak. And I have learned so much from your science background and your commitment to keeping us safe. And Matt, thank you for your work. As a journalist, as a person with edge that allows us to go deeper. And I really have to say to Katie Lee, to have an exhibit like this in Utah, in place, I think is heroic. And I just honor Utah State for having the kinds of conversations we need to have in this state. And I would like to. And this is a piece maybe a minute and a half long, 2 at the most. And I think it's as a Utahn realizing how often we compartmentalize and don't see the whole. And my debt is large to photographers like David, like Emmett Gowan, who at this very moment is having his opening in New York City regarding the Nevada test site. So I think to know that David's mentor, my mentor, you know, we're all talking about these things to find greater transparency, greater understanding to what it means to be human. The American landscape is under assault by an administration that cares only about themselves. Working behind closed doors, they are strategically undermining environmental protections that have been in place for decades and getting away with it. In practices of secrecy, in deeds of greed, in acts of violence that are causing pain. Like many, I have compartmentalized my state of mind in order to survive. Like most, I have also compartmentalized my state of Utah. It is a violence hidden that we all share. This is the fallout that has entered our bodies, nuclear bombs tested in the desert. Boom. These are uranium tailings left on the edges of our towns where children play. Boom. The war games played and nerve gas stored in the West Desert. Boom. These are the oil and gas lines, frac lines from Vernal to Bonanza in the Uinta Basin. Boom. This is Aneth and Montezuma Creek, the oil patches on Indian lands. Boom. Gut Bears Ears. Boom. Cut Grand Staircase Escalante in half. Boom. And every other wild place that is easier for me to defend than my own people and species. Boom. The coal and copper mines I watched expand as a child, Huntington and Kennecott. Boom. The oil refineries that foul the air and blacken our lungs in Salt Lake City. Boom. And the latest scar on the landscape, the tar sands mine in the Book Cliffs, closed, now hidden simply by its remoteness. Boom. Add the Cisco Desert where trains stop to settle the radioactive waste they carry onto Blanding. Boom. Move the uranium tailings from Moab to Crescent Junction, then bury it still hot in the alkaline desert, out of sight, out of mind. Boom. See the traces of human indignities on the sands near Topaz Mountain, left by the Japanese internment camps. Boom. We are being told a treacherous story that says it is an individual's right, our hallowed state's right, to destroy what is common to us all. The land beneath our feet, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. Our bodies and the bodies of the state of Utah are being violated. Our eyes are closed. Our mouths are sealed. We refuse to see or say what we know to be true. Utah is a beautiful violence.
Mark, I apologize for making you go after that.
Let's make this hard.
Terry uses the words to destroy what's common to us all. Before we jump further in this conversation, I'm wondering if you can give us, as an ecologist, some perspective on how much of the world we've destroyed. Maybe not destroyed, maybe altered. I'm not looking for a number here so much as a sense of whether there's anything even resembling pure nature anymore in this world, in the way that nature is often defined as being a system that is unaltered by human activity.
With climate change, I would say no. There is no place that has not been affected by human activity through the burning of fossil fuels and how that's affected our atmosphere, and therefore processes down to the depths of the Mariana Trench, or to the top of Mount Everest, or to the most remote places that make Dugway look like next door neighbors. But I don't always think about it that way. When I came to the opening a month or so ago and of David's exhibit, and I looked at the photographs, and I was struck by not only the patterns of the grids and the various places where there might be impacts or tests going on, but I was also struck by the resilience, the resistance of the land. So, I immediately, my eyes, as an environmental scientist, immediately went to those squiggly lines that you may have seen, which are essentially patterns left by the wind as it blows across the desert and is affected differentially by the shrubs. And I looked at those spots, those pockmarks on the landscape. And you could think about that, some of you may have looked at that and said, oh, wow, is that, sort of the remnants of explosions that occurred here? Well, no, what that was, those are harvester ant mounds. Those are ants, and there can be as many as 20 of these mounds in an acre of the Great Basin Desert, and they can be as big as 30 feet in diameter, and they've got these, and the ants not only build their nests there, and put these gravels on there that don't really support plants, but then they denude additional area around it, probably as a defense mechanism to make sure that predators can't sneak up on them so much. And so here we are in this place that is Dugway Proving Ground that has been altered because of to protect Americans against the worst instincts of any humans. And here, in amidst this, there are still large populations of kit foxes on the Dugway Proving Ground. There's things going on, and if there's environmental alteration, the worst is probably cheatgrass, which we brought from Central Asia, and is now spread across the thing and is affecting the landscape in different ways. So that's probably not quite what you asked, but that was my answer.
That's the best kind of answer. I would like to give you all an opportunity to not quite answer this question as well. Dugway isn't just any man-made place. This is a place where the United States has tested chemical and biological weapons and developed defenses against weapons of these sorts. That can feel like and sound like can be scary, frightening. I'm wondering how we make sense artistically and how we make sense emotionally of the things that human beings have unleashed upon our world. Don't everybody jump in at once.
Well, I think the first step is to look and to examine, right? And I'm really appreciative of the access that I was granted to make this body of work at Dugway. It wouldn't have been possible without a lot of a tremendously long and complex series of emails and phone calls and things of that nature. But the bottom line is I was granted access, right? So by permitting me access, I mean, I have a lot of respect for that response and for the way that I was treated at Dugway. And I'm deeply appreciative of it. But I think the first step is for us to, by looking, to redefine what landscape is, right? You know, we think of landscape as our backyard, or the school grounds where our kids play, or maybe a national park. Maybe we get out up to hike in the mountains, or on vacation we go to the beach. And that's how we think of landscape, but it's a much more complex series of sites than that. And I think we really are obliged to look at settings and to think about settings that we don't ordinarily occupy. So, you know, we could, I mean, when you were saying how, you know, what areas are untouched, no area is untouched, as you said. You know, I mean, 35 years ago, I photographed the Matanuska Glacier in Alaska. Well, it's basically disappearing now. And I have some figure in here from NASA's Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment, and it talks about the loss of 281 billion tons of ice per year between 1993 and 2016 from glaciers. So, you know, we need to look at these kinds of sites, right? And we think about the desert, maybe like where Dugway is located, but we think about the desert as this kind of pure thing. It's not. I mean, I've been working in the Atacama Desert in Chile most recently, and that area, which is the highest and driest and most environmentally sensitive desert on the planet, is being rapidly transformed by mining for lithium, because we need lithium for our iPhones, and we need it now. We need it for our electric car batteries that are supposedly going to solve the problem of burning fossil fuels. So we need to expand what we let ourselves think about. It's that simple.
If we accept this notion that everything has changed, that everything has been changed by human activity, how do you all think about just the concept of nature?
I'll follow up a little bit on his comment as well, because, and kind of the first question you asked me, part of my constant amazement is the beauty, and I'll tell you what, the night sky at Dugway is fantastic. But the series of roads that David has captured, and I really enjoyed going and seeing that, particularly in the way that it's presented, because that's the perspective that most people who work there never get. You don't see Dugway from the air. You certainly don't see it in that kind of definition or in presented, and maybe you're looking at Google Maps on your phone or something. But essentially, nobody gets that kind of perspective. So that's kind of neat. There's some beauty in it. I have seen the series of roads. Now Dugway's been around for nearly 77 years. Somebody at point had made these roads. Now the roads are much narrower. They're being reclaimed just over time. They're changing, and they will continue to change. The past of Dugway I can't really speak to. I can talk of the contemporary nature and what's been done there. Part of it is everything from, well, I've been able to hold a baby kestrel, because we're part of that kestrel project and banding those and working with those and the wildlife biologists that are there, but also the things that are done still out of doors for early detection, for providing detection of whatever that end goal might be, in supporting our warfighters, in supporting homeland security, in doing things that are ultimately used by the firefighters in our neighborhoods. And being able to provide a more immediate response and having better technology. Those differences are made not just in other regions of the world by warfighters, but they're being made in our communities by firefighters who now have better technology that they're able to use, and transitioning that information to them. That's exciting, and there's a beauty in that. There's interesting to see how what was created 77 years ago is changed over time. And where that constant movement goes. Things that were originally created with a mass of human labor, they're no longer relevant, or they're being used in a much more contemporary means. And certainly the bulk of human activity has shifted quite a bit.
I think about the costs. The nature of our obsession with the military complex. And, as a child growing up in Salt Lake City, and my cousin Lynn is here, our family's business is laying infrastructure. And so my grandfather spent a lot of time putting in gas lines, water lines to the Tooele Army Base and depot and our family has worked at Dugway. So you ask, what role does it have on our imagination? I remember being terrified as a child, knowing that across the Oakers were all these chemicals. Were we safe? What was happening? Why didn't we talk about it? I have to say, what is the cost? I think there probably isn't one family here that hasn't experienced cancer. In our family, 9 women in my family have all had mastectomy, 7 are dead, I believe, because of the nuclear testing. When you look at where that fallout was, I think any of us who grew up in Utah in 1968 remember close to 6,000 sheep dead. Why? We forget that. I think being down, we're now talking about uranium mining in this state. I've been down and talked to Navajo families, the Diné, who, 50,000 workers dead. These are not abstractions. This is not beautiful to me. This is, David, you asked the question about what we demand from the lands of the American West. We're a dumping ground. And this concerns me. And what I want to know is, how can it be more transparent? And I appreciate the people who work there. My brothers are cousins, my father, uncle, these are working class people. It's how I've benefited. How do we, it's not us versus them, but how do we as American citizens make the determination of what we sacrifice for our safety, but also what is the health of not just our families and communities, but the health of the planet? And how can we be more transparent? How can we take the secrecy that silences us and in many ways kills us into a place of healing?
One of the things that I just met Terry today. One of the things I appreciate is, while we come from different perspectives, backgrounds, we have some unifying elements, and the ability to visit, talk with you, and develop a friendship there and be able to have those conversations, I think, are important. And you mentioned something, and I've mentioned of my son, his greatest superpower is he asks questions. And I think asking questions, particularly we're at an academic institution, asking questions, that's the foundation of knowledge. Let's ask questions. Let's ask the right questions. I would love an opportunity to sit down and eat lunch with each of you, and we'd have some delightful conversations, just the experiences that I've had and the things I could relate and say, hey, you know what, here's the rest of the story. And there's a lot of mystery in what we don't know. And being able to understand it helps us to appreciate it better, or come to a better, now where do we go from here? So I really liked what she had mentioned about, asking those questions. Where are we at? What are we doing? And again, my experience is certainly more contemporary, and so it's kind of hard for me to say, hey, the whys and the wherefores from past generations. But I am excited that exists quite clearly through a lot of what's done. I think people are recognizing there's a difference to be made, and they're working to make a positive difference. Some things that I had no clue of when I first arrived at Dugway Proving Ground, and then being able to see what's being done to make a positive influence. And we're one, if you will, one little gem in the overall map of Dugway of Utah. Dugway Proving Ground is just one little part. And you mentioned there's the Tooele Army Depot, there's the south area that's since essentially completed its activity, and there's so many other things. I'm interested in learning more about all of the other things that were introduced here today, but again, my ability to respond or talk about it for one little facet, and asking questions. That's the path to knowledge.
Terry, you talk about a changing landscape, a psychologically changing landscape as well. And Mark, can you add to that? Because you mentioned earlier about the fact that there's nothing unchanged now, and that climate change is really responsible for this sense that there's nothing unchanged. And I'm wondering, do you feel like over your lifetime that the psychological climate has shifted in response to the way that we now can't look at things as untouched?
Listen, I've been thinking about, as I've been listening to some of the discussion we've been having today, we are thinking about humans as being somehow different from nature. Even though humans are, biological organisms with, we're transforming our environment to achieve our objectives, just as the ants are transforming the environment to achieve their objectives. But we are different, and so I think part of the way that we are different is that the way we think about our relationship with nature has changed over the years. If you think about, for millennia, humans were, given the imperative, they were given dominion over the earth, and then there was this reaction to it, which is, almost like, no, humans are the problem. Humans are different, and the world would be a better place if there were fewer of us, which may be true, but I'm not volunteering. And and so, but what I'm seeing now is when we think about the environment, I think there's more and more people that are trying to think about a partnership that acknowledges that humans have needs from their environment, but also acknowledges that there are other things here. And so, to my mind, that certainly is, it may not be the modal response from people in Utah, certainly not in our legislature, but I think that I see that in my students, and I see that in the ways that natural resource managers are trying to solve their problems. Not so much let's transform, but let's figure out how to I'm not sure exactly, conform in a way.
I think it also comes down to, what do we value? There's such a paradox, I think, here in Utah in particular. We are so proud of, Zion, Bryce, Canyonlands, Arches, all of our national monuments. And yet, Bears Ears, for example, and yet if you just go a little bit off the highway, there's the largest capped uranium mine imaginable. We don't see those things. And I just wonder, what is it that we value, and at what point do we as citizens rise up on behalf of the open space of democracy? Do we want to be a sacrifice zone as Utahns? Are we passive? And that's where I want to have the conversation, whether it's in the legislature or in our communities, that it's not just, we are not the only species that lives and breathes here. I look at that video, David, of the chemical cloud, the chlorine, and I think about the eagles. I think about all the birds migrating from Great Salt Lake. What's the effect? And I appreciated you saying that you make sure when the winds are blowing and when they're not, and putting that mylar. That I think is important pieces of information, so how we can work together. But I think we have to say, at what scale are we living at? And, in a place like Salt Lake City, my brother lost half of his lung. He's out every day in the valley laying pipe. I didn't know there were 3 floors of people with lung diseases. We don't see that. So these are the questions I'm asking. What do we value as citizens? How do we become part of the conversation, not passive participants?
David, are you actively trying to generate those conversations with your art?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I want the conversations to happen. I don't want the work to be so didactic that it tells you what to think. It's really important to me that I present things in an open-ended way. I'm very, I think, maybe even sometimes overly careful to work in that manner, but I want there to be dialogue and conversation and curiosity sparked by the work, and not just this project, but every project that I've made. Really, that's the goal. That's the goal. Yeah.
You've all had an opportunity, I think, to walk through David's exhibit, yes? I want to step away from context here for a moment. If possible at all, given the heavy nature of the context of this work, but I'd like to focus on aesthetics, which is to say, like, an artistic appreciation devoid of understanding of the function of this subject matter. Can you even imagine putting yourself in a state in which you could consider David's work outside of that context? And what would you see if you were looking at it not knowing it was Dugway Proving Ground, not knowing what that meant?
I think David made a comment, I think in the presentation about, it resembled the abstract art of other people, and I didn't know the two individuals that you mentioned, but I can think about, we do find attraction to pattern, so that art which is provided without context, we can still appreciate. And a lot of what we're looking at is how things fit together within that space that's on the canvas, or in the case of this, sometimes on the floor, or in large format photographs. And so, I'm often, one of the things that I've been interested in as a scientist is, why do we even perceive beauty? What would be the point of aesthetics? And why would an abstract design attract us at all? And yet cultures have come up with these various kind of symbols, and designs that matter to them and that are repeated in art, and and repeated in products that they make. And there, for some reason, this is something that we seem to be drawn to.
I was captivated by one particular piece that I really enjoyed, and it was because it's from an oblique perspective of an area where I have been many times, and roads that I have driven, and I've appreciated the parallelism that was there, but you have a view of the downwind grid and Target S taken from an oblique perspective, and I appreciated just the beauty of it, just being able to kind of take it in, and the way, in the large format that it's presented, that was fun. And your question is just kind of, if it was a fresh palette of my own brain looking at it, that's the one that I was drawn to.
And walking into that room, with the grids, my first impression was that they were star charts, almost fractals from the ground projected upward. And they were exquisite, and it reminded me of Rilke, beauty is the beginning of terror. So again, it's holding these contradictions and paradoxes at once. And I also thought of Agnes Martin with her grid and the echoes there. But then I have to say, David, walking into the rapid fire images with music, and the name of it is called?
Kidoimos.
And maybe you could talk about where that name comes from. I couldn't stay there. For me, it became a series of seizures. And I thought, if I stay there any longer, I will have that effect. And to me, that's the power, being seized by art to where your body feels it. And I am changed by that experience. And that, to me, is embodied art. That if we were to stay long enough in the heart of what is happening there without protection, it is a seizure of our mind, our body, our imagination. And I love the image of the building that you projected. and it's white, it's bright, it attracts light, but it also extends the shadow. And so I think to be able to look at the positive that is happening there, and also the shadow side, that you can't have one without the other. And that's what I saw. That to me was the deeper aesthetic that I'm leaving with.
Thank you. That's wonderful to hear. In a way, it was the goal of that piece. And Kidoimos, the title, is Greek for the din of battle. But it came to me from an experience I had on my first trip to Dugway, where I was happened to be there at the time when they were doing basically almost like a trade show at the site of Dugway, where civilian companies could pitch their technologies to the military and use Dugway as essentially a proving ground to perhaps sell their technology to the military or use Dugway as a site to develop that technology. The press packet for that event was called Sophos Kidoimos. I might be mispronouncing all of it, but it basically meant wisdom over the din of battle. So with that piece, I collaborated with Chris Kallmeyer, who's an amazing composer, sound artist, musician, to make an oral component that could correspond to this very intensely choreographed sequence of something like 50,000 aerial images of those test sites. And they're sequenced together in kind of rapid fire succession. And we do warn viewers that they, if they are prone to seizure, they might want to be careful as to how long they spend, or if they even go into that encounter. It grew out of my feeling that even with the enormous scale of those gridded pieces on the wall, those pieces printed on aluminum that are 10 by 10 feet, there was actually a limit to what still photography could do, that it wasn't fully descriptive of the potency of what's happening in that landscape. And that in order for me to try to access that, I had to work in a different arena than I had before. And it's that rapid fire succession, which in some ways is somewhat parallel to what it's like to work from the air when you're in a constantly moving vehicle in the sky, leaning out of the window with the wind blowing, and I'm looking through the lens, I'm hand-holding this camera, and time and space are kind of getting strung together, and as I'm making exposures, not that I'm shooting that rapidly, but it has that feeling of pulling something out of the wild, you know, that to see this kind of constantly shifting series of potential framings and potential kind of offerings, how you extract from that, that's something that sort of I was hoping to, in a way, convey with that video piece. So.
Nobody is able to say that name right, by the way. We all just called it SK.
SK.
Just so you know.
The SK Challenge.
They called it SK Challenge,
yes.
yeah. And it was used, essentially a large effort can be very expensive. So we would host a lot of universities and other companies that would want to come in, and they get their early look at things. They get a challenge, and then they can try and look and see how well they're able to develop them and come up with better technologies and improve those things. And so that was kind of hey, here's a pooled resource, all comers kind of come in and then be able to participate in that. And
so it's like a trade show?
No, it was a common test bed. So we would provide a common set of experiences, and we would provide all the referee data. So everybody who had a standoff detector or an identifier or something that would be an optical way of measuring or gathering information, and they'd say, well, our detector says this. When we could say, well, our detectors, the ground truth data is this. And they go, aha, well, we can see where we can make some improvements, tweaks, or hey, we're pretty close, whatever. So that it kind of helped spur technology. And that's what the purpose was, is to help move technology forward and give ground truth information to a common challenge.
testing for chemicals in the air, or what's the technology for example?
Good question. Let me work up to the answer. Part of what we would do is either use a simulant, either out of doors or in a facility we call the Joint Ambient Breeze Tunnel. It's a building, it's 1/10 of a mile long, it's about 30 feet tall, and it allows us to characterize using ambient air, but be able to have a diffused capability of well characterized of a particle cloud coming through, so that they'd be able to use light detection and ranging, LiDAR, or some other optical device to be able to say, hey, from a kilometer away, what's there? And
There's something in the air.
There's something in the air there. And we're using a simulant. It may be kaolin powder. It may be a non-pathogenic bacteria, spore forming, for example, something like that. So we're using a simulant in those situations. They're interrogating that cloud with whatever detector that they may have, and we're able to provide them the corresponding ground truth information, either through point detection or our own light detection and ranging information. Sometimes we do that in one of the grids that you will see in David Maisel's exhibit. And what's really fascinating is that all of that is really keyed on a meteorological basis of information. You're the unwitting consumers of meteorological information produced by Dugway Proving Ground. At over 100 towers and a variety of very small portable weather information display systems that are collecting wind speed and direction and relative humidity, all of that that's coming through is fed into university, not my alma mater, south of here. And also that goes into the national airspace. If we do a weather balloon or something like that, that information is fed into the national weather database, and it's used to provide better weather information here locally and as well as nationally. But it's that body of information of weather data that allows us to make a predictive model so that we can then say, hey, look, this is where we're going to instrument. And also it provides us the go, no-go criteria to be able to know where that's going to end up, but to be able to then create a cloud, give them the background information of where that cloud's then going to go, and then also all of that data set that comes with it to be able to improve and test their own technologies. So all of those things are coming together, and the benefit that then comes out of that as well is that we're using that real-time data to then further improve the models that then we'll create. So there's a lot going on. It's pretty exciting. I love it. There's some really neat things that happen there, and it adds to an overall body of knowledge, and it helps improve technology.
It's not really unlike what artists do, right? We come into a common experience and then we put our own eyes to it and our own approaches to it to try to make sense of it. This is what you both do in your own artwork, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
I mean, I do think it's an interrogation of ideas. But again, I keep thinking they're false equivalents in a way. My pen, I mean, it's a pen, it's a pencil, it can be erased, no one reads it. It's not going to harm someone. It's to illuminate, it's not, I hope, although I have to say, maybe what I've written has harmed some people in my family. But we're talking about war. We're talking about people. We're talking about countries and power and secrecy, and I think that can't be abstracted.
And toxins.
Yeah.
And toxins that get released.
And that are going to be here for thousands of years, in a place like the Nevada test site. There's a reason why you're in restricted airspace, right?
Well, there's actually several reasons why.
Good point.
Mostly so that people don't wander into a jet that comes by. By the way, I'm not going to reveal any classified information, but you asked for a secret. You're going to love this one. The air traffic control tower at Michael Army Airfield, empty. Hasn't been used in years and years and years and years. All the air traffic control is done by the Air Force somewhere else off the installation. And now allowing the Air Force to do their work there, that's the restricted airspace aspect of that. They're they're flying fast, they're doing all of the different military things that they need to do, and that doesn't coincide with airliners just coming by.
There's a whole drone program at Dugway as well, yeah.
There is. The program manager for the Army for unmanned aircraft systems has a component at Dugway Proving Ground known as the Rapid Integration and Acceptance Center. And part of what happens there is for specific unmanned aircraft that are going to be flown in theater, after it's made, they send it to Dugway and they do all the verification that is it going to work, and they fly it and do all the performance systems checks, and then they can box it up and send it to where it can be used. So all of that is done there. And they're looking for other things there for rapid integration of newer technologies, a better muffler, for example, or something, a better pitch for a wing. It could be anything, but what they're looking to do to improve those technologies, and flying that over your house to see if it flies or crashes. They need a space to be able to do that, and so that's how they do that.
We need to turn to questions. I wanted to give Mark the opportunity to have a final word on what you've heard in this discussion. You've been a little quiet over there.
Yeah, and that's partly because we're moving outside of areas that I know very much about. Something struck me, all the way as we've been having this discussion and as I'm preparing and thinking about this topic for the last few days, I've been thinking about how what we do as humans is more different in terms of scale of impact than it is relative to other species. So, David mentioned toxins, and I immediately thought of frogs and insects are using toxins for territorial defense or for attack purposes to achieve their ends. Altering the environment is something that that is not uncommon to species. It would be wonderful if all of us, our territorial defense was done the way that songbirds do it. But unfortunately, we haven't evolved in that direction.
That's a lovely final word.
That's awesome.
I would love to offer y'all the opportunity to ask a few questions. I think we have a little bit of time. Is that correct? Okay, and there is a microphone floating around somewhere out here.
And you can go ahead and ask the question if the microphone is not for the sake of it. Can I just go ahead? Yeah. And you can repeat the question, Matthew.
Yes.
I just want to say I love Dugway. I had the opportunity to work out there 4 summers and then 1 full year, and I agree with Liddiard. It's absolutely gorgeous. And there might be a few areas where they do testing, but overall, Dugway Proving Ground is pristine, gorgeous, and it's an ecologist's dream. It hasn't been grazed since the early 50s, and there's plants out there that you can go and see them in a natural world that is untouched by man. Yes, there is, you referred that there's no place that's been touched, but Dugway is pristine, it's unique, and I just feel grateful that I had the opportunity to be out there. It's just gorgeous. So that's my plug for Dugway.
Okay, thank you.
That raises an interesting issue. Very often military installations are really good places to do ecological research because they aren't grazed. They may have been at some time. They don't have ATVs running all over the place. They don't have a number of other things. And so, like even if you go north to the Hill Air Force Base, I forget what they call it now. It's not the bombing range anymore. They have some more sanitized name for it. But so there's an impact area, and then there's something like 10 or 15 miles around the target zone where there isn't anything, but there's this big old fence, and people are like, well, I'm not going to go in there because I don't know when they're going to bomb someplace and where. And so as a result, you might have things that you wouldn't have you wouldn't be able to find. One of my colleagues, now retired Lila Schultz, was telling me earlier today that she, when she was doing rare plant surveys out in the West Desert, they found two species, one a local weed and one a variety of saltbush, that they found nowhere else. It was very rare, but it was found at Dugway.
Hi, I don't know how to phrase this as a question, but growing up in Salt Lake as a child, like I was terrified of the Dugway Proving Grounds because we'd always hear in school that, during the Cold War, we were going to be the first that would have all the radiation and stuff. And my great uncle was a sheep herder. And he would always tell stories about when, in the winter, when they take the sheep to the West Desert and about the big sheep kill. And he would also describe the beauty of the desert out there. But it was always such a terrifying thing. And I wonder how you can address the transparency thing, or, as Terry says, this compartmentalization. Because as we grew up, the pervasive culture was not to question, obey, obedience, and this is just how it was. We were a target. And so if you could address, that there has been some trauma or, fear inflicted because of the lack of transparency or understanding or even, letting the children know exactly what's going on. As our relatives are dying of cancer and we don't know where it's from and stuff. So.
Maybe shortly, so we have more time for questions, but how do you consider your responsibility for as much transparency as possible while also acknowledging the fact that there's a lot you can't be transparent about? There's a duality there that's difficult to balance, yeah?
Yeah, so differing now from 1968, the event you're referring to, I'm here. I think that kind of helps show you what some of those differences are. In some ways, I could have put my head in the sand, but many thanks, Katie, not only dedicated and passionate, but willing to kind of pursue these things. Many thanks, Katie. But being here, and my public affairs officer probably going to kill me, but this is part of what we're doing. Part of outreach, part of talking to people. I think in many cases, for myself, I think we fear what we don't understand. We've got folks at Dugway who go, you know what, I wouldn't go over to that building. Why? Well, you talk to people in that building and they're like, what's the big deal? Come in, we'll show you. Look, this is what's here and what we work with. And when you take the unknown, when you ask the questions, it really helps. So I'm here to be able to say, here's what we can talk about. Here's some good things to talk about. Here's some things. I love some of the comments that Mark has made, and I'll try and keep it short. There is a desire to be able to have a transparency and provide information. We do that in the environmental work that we do. We believe to be good stewards of the environment and capturing what we are going to do, the deliberate nature of why. And again, I'm talking from a contemporary what's happening now. And so there is information that is available. We are in the nethermost part of Utah. There is a scary fence that's there. But Dugway Proving Ground is made up of people who are trying to do the right thing. They're eager to participate, and they're staunch defenders of doing what is right. And so that information does exist. There is information that is available. By and large, most of what we do is not that classified. There's a lot of information that is available.
We have time for one more question.
My question is for David. As a young man, I was a wildland firefighter, and I had the dubious honor of actually scouting fires on the Dugway Proving Ground for the North End, and walking through the night, sometimes with others, sometimes alone, kind of going miles into the proving ground following fire. And it's an amazing experience, as this woman suggests. It's an incredible landscape. And I was wondering if you ever had the opportunity, rather than to fly over, to actually get down on the ground and just walk and get a sense for the place.
Sure. Sure, it's an extraordinary place, absolutely. It is, there's a lot about it that's physically magnetic, absolutely magnetic. The mountains are magnetic. The vistas are exhilarating. And yet, I mean, it's not set apart as to be a nature preserve. That's not its function, really. So can a site be beautiful and also be damaging at the same time? Without a doubt. I didn't set out to make a body of work about the natural beauty of Dugway. That wasn't my intent. Another photographer perhaps would have pursued it that way. There are wild mustangs on the site. There's tremendous beauty there, and I don't, in a way, question that. To me, what's interesting is that a place can be complex, that the beauty can be there as well as the difficult issues that arise from that place, that those things can coexist.
We are going to move our event to the museum. Oh, excuse me. David and Terry have books available. They, I understand, are willing to sign those books. All of these panelists, I believe, are coming over and can answer your questions. I see some undergraduates in the room. There is also free food. Please join me in thanking this very fascinating and diverse panel.